often do. I'll just stay down here on the... Why is everybody over here?
Over here? You want me over here?
No, well, this is weird. I'll just
over here.
go ahead and be like this, I guess. You guys, I'll look at you maybe, but everybody's over here. You guys are gonna tip the foundation of the church. Gotta be cautious with that. As Kelvin was so eloquently saying, tomorrow we celebrate Memorial Day, and I love Memorial Day. My grandpa, he was a veteran, and I remember when he died, I remember the honor that was bestowed upon him by having an honor guard come and render the final salute and all that goes along with that. And that's actually one of the things I get to do when I do National Guard stuff is I'm on the honor guard. And for me, it's extra special. It's nice to be able to do that because they deserve it. Janie's dad died as a direct result of his service in Vietnam. But here's the thing. Like every other memorial or every other holiday, it can start to lose its meaning. Memorial Day is no different. When it first was instituted, it was shortly after the Civil War, and what families would do is they would go and they would decorate graves with flowers and ribbons and things like that. And it was known as Decoration Day back then. Over the course of time, it became known as Memorial Day. And in 1971, we moved it from being observed on May 30th to being observed on the last Monday in May. And that was a good thing and it was a bad thing. It gave us a concrete day of the week that we could remember it, but it's also a bad thing because nowadays we kind of look at Memorial Day as an extended weekend. We get to have a barbecue, people go camping, and those are not bad things in and of themselves, but it neuters the importance of Memorial Day. It takes kind of the importance away from that. Now, likewise, in the church, there's a couple of memorials that we, too, can start to lose the importance of. And I'm going to talk briefly about both of those. And I had no idea that you were going to ask me to be back next week. But the first one that I'm going to talk about is actually found in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Turn there with me if you will. While you're turning there, I just want to talk a little bit about this book. It's written by Paul to a church in a city called Corinth. In this letter, Paul addresses many issues, including the cross, divine wisdom, the work of the Spirit, carnality, eternal rewards, the transformation of salvation, sanctification, the nature of Christ's union with Him, and many, many other issues. Amongst them, sandwiched in there, is the Lord's Supper, communion. And Hannah, I was leaning over to Hannah as the offering plate went by. She was staring up here, and I thought she was looking at the pretty flowers and arrangements, but she was looking at this. This, do in remembrance of me. Communion is meant to be a memorial to what Christ did for us. In our church society, we typically celebrate communion once a month. Some churches, it's not a real word. Some churches celebrate it every week. Some will celebrate it only once a quarter, some once a year. Some will celebrate it during the morning service on Sunday. Some will celebrate it on the evening service or a midweek service. Some will even do it in their home Bible studies. However you celebrate it, it's all meant to memorialize what Christ did for us. It was instituted by Him Himself, by Jesus Himself. Whatever form they use in their own way, we're all doing the same thing when we celebrate memorial or communion. And that's, for me, it's an exciting thing to be able to do that. But if you'll read with me, starting in verse 23, 1 Corinthians 11. For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, in the night in which He was betrayed, took bread. And when He had given thanks, He broke it and said, This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, He took the cup also after supper, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until He comes. Now, before I get into the meat of what I wanted to talk about, I just want to point to one final sentence there. You proclaim the Lord's death until He comes. See, Memorial Day, and this is me on a little bit of soapbox here. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too. But we so often forget that we should celebrate communion. That when Jesus did it, He said that this will be the last time I do this until I enter into my kingdom with you. So it's looking forward to when Jesus comes back And we're able to celebrate it in like a party atmosphere. But too often, we're so somber about it. We're too somber about it. And I'm not saying that we should take and throw everything out that we've ever done with I keep calling it Memorial Day, with communion, but at the same time, there should be a celebratory aspect to it. So, that being said, I'm off that soapbox. Okay, so Paul starts out by letting the Corinthian church know that what he was writing to them about, he wasn't making it up. He was talking specifically about the very fact that Jesus himself bestowed upon him his very salvation. It's no different for you or I. I mean, our salvation doesn't come by our grandparents or our parents or our cousins or some street preacher. It comes by way of Jesus himself. That's where salvation comes. And Paul goes on to tell them that I'm not making this up. I learned it from him and I passed it on to you. So everything that he talks about is not something that is made up. It's not something that he imagined. It's something that he learned from Jesus himself. But I do want to call your attention to the very first word in this passage. It's a small word. It's an important word, though. That word is for. In the Greek, it's a connector. You guys want to learn the Greek word today? Gar. G-A-R. Gar. There you are. You're multilingual now. Go wow your friends. It means for. It connects one idea to another idea. It's a conjunction. And when you see it, when you see words like that, when you see words like therefore or after these things, kind of need to look a little bit deeper. You can't just camp out on that one passage. So if you will, look up in verse 17. But in giving this instruction, I do not praise you because you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that divisions exist among you. And in part, I believe it. For there must also be factions among you, so that those who are approved may become evident among you. Therefore, when you meet together, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper, for in your eating, each one takes his own supper first. And one is hungry, and another is drunk. What? Do you not have houses in which to eat and drink? Or do you not despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you? In this I will not praise you. I hear that, and I just go, wow. Doesn't sound like Paul is saying, good job, does it? He's not saying good job to them. He wants to praise them. He wants to be able to say, you guys are doing it great. As I'm pretty confident that your former pastor, when he thinks of you guys, he wants to think nothing but great things. And it would be painful for him to call or write you guys and say, what are you guys doing? That's Paul's attitude here. He said, what are you guys doing? When they come together for a corporate gathering, there are factions, divisions, and favoritism. That doesn't sound like something Jesus would have wanted. If you're quick, turn over to John chapter 17, verse 18. I'll start reading, you start turning. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. This is Jesus' high priestly prayer here, guys. I do not ask on behalf of these alone, but for those also who believe in me through their word, that they may also be one, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. The glory which you have given me, I have given to them, and that they may be one, just as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may be perfected in unity, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them, even as you have loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, be with me where I am, so that they may see my glory, which you have given me, for you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, although the world has not known you, yet I have known you, and these have known that you sent me, and I have made your name known to them, and will make it known, so that love with which you loved me may be in them, and I in them. Jesus is praying for unity. Jesus is not praying for factions. He's not praying for divisions. He's not praying for favoritism. He's praying for unity amongst the believers in Corinth. He's praying for unity amongst churches in Oak Hill and Beckley. He's praying for unity amongst all those who come before us and those who will come after us. He's praying for unity. But back in Corinthians, we read about factions, divisions, and favorites. And some are coming together celebrating the Lord's table drunk. Drinking. Drunk. May I never see that. Please, God, may I never see that. Recently, I was attending a class, like Kelvin was saying, I was learning how to be an air conditioning repairman for the Army. I was in Kansas, and when you travel, the first things that you look for when you travel is there a Starbucks, is there a good gym, and is there a good church? And that's in any particular order. So I looked those up, and yes, there was a good Starbucks, there was a good gym, and there was a good church. At least I thought so. And I'm not dogging this church. I'm really not dogging this church. I went to this church. I'm not going to name it, but I'm sitting there, and I love you guys because a new face comes in here, and you greet that person, and you say hi to them. This church, I'm a new face. I'm sitting there. Nobody comes up to me and says, "Hi, how you doing? My name is blah blah blah." And I'm kind of in church circles. I kind of know how churches operate. Been doing this a while. But I started looking around the auditorium, and it's a larger church, and off in the corner I see a table with communion stuff set up on it. I was like, oh, okay. Now, I like this. I like this front and center. This is my preference. This is keeping what Christ did front and center. It wasn't tucked away off in the corner, but there it was. Okay, I can live with that, I guess. Come to find out, they celebrate communion every week, but I didn't know that at the time. So I'm sitting there, and worship starts. And I will tell you this, guys, the worship experience was phenomenal. High quality. I loved it. The Spirit was moving in, at least me. It might have been moving in the whole building. I'm hoping so, not just in me. But then when that gets done, the youth pastor got up, and he read from this very passage, 1 Corinthians 11, and then they started handing out the elements. And I started watching because it starts up front and I'm sitting at the back because that's where I usually like to sit. And as the people get they get the bread first and they eat it right away. They pass it on. And then they get the cup, they drink it right away and pass it on. Now, I don't know what your guys' tradition is here, but I will tell you that I felt rushed. I felt rushed. I didn't have a chance to sit there and look inward. Am I taking communion well? Or am I taking it hurriedly? And that day I took it hurriedly. And I usually read that passage of Scripture, 1 Corinthians 11, when I do visitation. I do communion at home for people. And for me, I got a little concerned. Because I also know that there's an also part. There's a therefore. And if you look at verse 27 back in 1 Corinthians 11, it says, "Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. But a man must examine himself, and in so doing he is to eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks judgment to himself, if he does not judge the body rightly. For this reason, many among you are weak and sick, and a number sleep. But if we judged ourselves rightly, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are disciplined by the Lord, so that we will not be condemning along with the world. So then, my brethren, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. If anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, so that you will not come together for judgment. The remaining matters I will arrange when I come." Anyone, any single person, you, me, anyone, who eats at the Lord's table in an unworthy manner, or drinks in an unworthy manner, shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. Let me ask you guys this. What do I mean by an unworthy manner?
A non-Christian.
Non-Christian, that's definitely very true. Non-Christians should not take communion, just flat out. It does them spiritual damage. But what about those who are Christian? What's an unworthy manner? How about you take it ritualistically? How about you take it with an unrepentant heart? A spirit of bitterness? What about any sort of ungodly attitude? What if you came to church and on your way to church you got into a bitter fight with your wife? We didn't, just saying. Is that a good time to take communion? Should you maybe just let the plate pass you? Maybe let the cup go by?
By the way, we partake together here.
Excellent. But I think we need to remove ritual from this memorial. We need to be intentional about how we remember what Jesus, God himself, did for us. We need to ensure that our hearts are right. How do we do that? Paul outlines it for us. I love the Bible. It's so good with this. How do I do this? Well, let me read on. Examine yourselves. Not like you're getting a physical. Examine your heart. Is your heart right? Be honest. Don't answer me today. Don't answer me tomorrow. Don't answer me next week. But answer God, because you will answer. If you are taken in an unworthy manner, God knows. You know, and God knows. I think when churches handle the elements with a cavalier attitude, like they did at that church in Kansas, they're encouraging and they're condoning people to take it in an unworthy manner. Now, I said that they take communion every week. The next week I went back, had an even better worship experience. And then when the plate came by, I held the bread. And then when the cup came by, I held the bread, or the cup. And then I took time. And I asked for forgiveness from God for my previous attitude the week before. I didn't want to be embarrassed. I mean, gosh, who wants to be embarrassed in church? I don't. But I should have been more concerned about, am I taking it in a worthy manner versus whether or not I'm being embarrassed. I don't think we need to sit in sackcloth and ashes, though, when we take communion. We shouldn't sit back and go, woe is me, I just lost my best friend. I don't think we need to be thinking about things like that. I think we should look to the fact that our sin put Jesus on the cross. That's an important aspect of it. But conversely, we also need to, like I said before, be thinking forward. Jesus is coming back, and we will get to take communion with him in the flesh. And that should be exciting to us. But if we don't take it as an exciting thing, it's just going to be a somber event. And there should be some somberness to it. But there should also be a yes, 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 Jesus is coming back aspect to it. Because it is one of those things, it talks about the past, it talks about the present, it talks about the future. Enjoy communion in that sense. As a leader within the church, I would hope that I would never find myself being so casual with the Lord's table that I would lead others to be cavalier, casual, lazy, disrespectful. There was a church in Washington that, back when I was first in seminary, I was interviewing there, and I talked with the hiring committee, and they were talking about how they got rid of a pastor because of his exact way of how he handled communion. He thought it was fine that at a youth retreat that they used Dr. Pepper and Twinkies. I'll leave it up to you to make your own judgment call on that. Earlier I mentioned that there are two Memorial Days that we as Christians are in peril of neutering in their meaning. Just talked about the Lord's table. Let me explain the other. Every Sunday can lose its meaning. Every Sunday. 1 Corinthians 11:17. But in giving this instruction, I do not praise you because you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that divisions exist among you, and in part I believe it. For there must also be factions among you, so that those who are approved may become evident among you. Like I said before, Paul would love to say that he's proud of this church. But if you've read the first book of Corinthians, you're going to look at it and go, there's no way Paul is sitting there going, attaboy, guys, you're nailing it. They're not. This was a church where he had friends. He helped found this church. He had spiritual relatives in that church. And we can assume that this church, like many churches throughout history, meet at least once weekly. And the same warnings for those who take communion with a wrong heart also apply to those who show up to church on Sunday with a bad heart. If we come to church indifferently, if we come to it hurriedly, or if we come to church with bitterness, we're in danger of causing ourselves spiritual harm. You can't grow with attitudes like those, folks. You just can't. When we approach Sundays with an attitude of ritual and rote, let me ask you guys this. When you wake up on Sunday mornings, is your first thought on God, or is it on where you're going for lunch? Don't answer that. Look inward. Examine your heart. When you wake up on Sunday morning, are you excited to come and worship, or are you going, gosh, I don't want to meet that guy that I just don't like? I can't avoid him. They're at church. I'm at church. I got to be there. Let me also say this. If you have an attitude of I got to be there, stop. Stop. God doesn't want that. As much as he wants a cheerful giver, he wants a cheerful worshiper. Do you look like you're worshiping and joy-filled if you're worshiping like this? No. If you have joy in your heart, tell your face. Tell your face. There should be a smile. You should enjoy coming to church. Why? Because you're rubbing elbows with other people who believe the same as you. We're not going to agree on everything. That would be weird. We just don't agree on everything. But on the majors, we agree on everything. And that's awesome. It is so awesome. I know I keep saying that it's going to cause us harm. Why do I say that? When you look at verse 7, a person shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. And again in verse 29, for he who eats and drinks judgment to himself if he does not judge the body rightly. What the heck does that passage mean? I mean, it sounds kind of gobbledygook. It means this: when believers do not properly judge the holiness of the memorial, whether it be communion or Sunday itself, then they are guilty of dishonoring Jesus' blood and Jesus' body, treating lightly the gracious sacrifice of Christ to us all. Let me say that again. When believers do not properly judge the holiness of the memorial, whether it be communion or Sunday itself, then they are guilty of dishonoring Jesus' blood and Jesus' body, treating lightly the gracious sacrifice of Christ for us all. It's a pretty heavy thing, what Jesus did. Twinkies, Dr. Pepper, gossip, fighting on your way to church, avoidance, worried more about lunch than the Lord. These are all things that I believe treat Jesus' sacrifice lightly. It is necessary to intentionally come to communion and to intentionally come to worship. Stuff doesn't just accidentally happen in the universe, by the way. I think we all can agree on that there's an intelligent design that happened called the Creator. Nor does worship happen by happenstance. Worship happens by an intentional heart approaching it. So how do you do that? Maybe you begin on Saturday night for Sunday. Maybe, like the Jewish people do, their tradition is that on the Sabbath, which for them is on Saturday, they begin Friday night. They stop whatever it is that they're doing at sundown on Friday, and they prepare themselves physically and spiritually for what they're going to be doing on the Sabbath, which is definitely not work. But maybe that'll work well for us as Christians. Maybe on Saturday night, doesn't have to be, don't get legalistic about it, but just sit there and go, what are some things that I can do that can prepare me for worship tomorrow? And if maybe next Saturday, communion's the next day, maybe you come to this passage and read it over. Or maybe you go to one of the Gospels where Jesus does it with his disciples and read that as a family. Read it to your loved ones. Discuss it. Talk about it. Start on Saturday for what you're going to do on Sunday. So, begin the night before. Something else you might consider doing is write down your testimony. When was the last time any of us wrote our testimony out? For me, it's been a while. But I will tell you this, don't write your conversion testimony down. It's important, yes, but answer this question. What is God doing in my life today? What is he doing currently? He's doing something. Do you sense him? Do you sense his presence? Do you see his fingerprints on your life? I will tell you this, that on my travel back, I was driving, and God protected me. There are 2 times that I can know, that I think of right off the top of my head, where somebody came into my lane while I was driving. One was by mere inches in front of me. The other was mere inches on the side of me. Didn't tell you that, did I?
No.
Begin the night before. Write down your testimony, your current testimony. Evangelize. Invite people to church. Invite people. Why is that important? There's very few things that we do here on earth that we're going to not do in heaven. We're going to be able to worship in heaven. We're going to be able to serve in heaven. We're not going to be able to evangelize in heaven. Why? Everybody in heaven has already been evangelized. It's not a need for it. The only time you get to talk to people about Jesus is here on earth. In heaven, you're going to see Jesus. And they're going to see Jesus. And you're going to be partying it like it's 1999. It's an old song. Sorry. Invite your neighbors. Become involved in your neighbors' lives. Do you know who your neighbor is? I hope so. They're important people. But here's one that's critical. Make things right with those that are around you. If you know that somebody has something against you, go to that person and say, I don't know what I did. I'm here to ask for forgiveness on whatever it is. Make it right. I believe that if we do these things, we can and will approach Sundays with more reverence and give deeper honor to Jesus during communion. And that way, these two memorials, do this in remembrance of me, and every Sunday will not become neutered. The importance is going to rise to the top. It's going to become more dynamic. Your worship is going to be greater and deeper. The depths of your relationships with each other is going to be fantastic. We just need to make sure that we're intentional about what we do and not haphazard and not cavalier. Amen? Amen. That's it for me.
We do welcome everyone.